Hello and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Jerry Knowles, representing the 124th District, which encompasses a portion of Berks as well as Schuylkill counties. At the beginning of the last legislative session, the majority leader made it clear that our number one priority was to do whatever possible to allow jobs to be created and retained here in Pennsylvania. We understand that government does not create jobs, but it can either encourage or discourage job creation by the policies it enacts. How does Pennsylvania rank among other states, and what things need to be done to improve our standing? Joining me today to help answer those questions is Gene Barr. Gene is the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. Gene, thank you for joining me today and welcome.
Representative, great to be here.
Yes, it's always great to be here. Harrisburg is a very special place to all of us. It indeed is. Gene, I thought that we'd just start out by talking a little bit about you and your background and exactly what it is that you do here in Harrisburg.
Okay, that'd be great. Representative, I spent about 20 years in actually the energy industry. I grew up in the Philadelphia area. I worked for British Petroleum for 13 years and an organization called API, American Petroleum Institute, for 7. My career with BP actually began in an oil refinery down there. I worked shift work at an oil refinery. I was third generation to work at the refinery. They moved me around a bit. I was glad to take the opportunity to come back to Pennsylvania. I worked, as I said, at API here in Harrisburg, worked at a law firm briefly, and wound up coming over to the chamber about 10, 11 years ago now.
How about that? It seems like you've been there forever.
Well, some days it does seem like that,
Yeah.
depending on what's going on with issues. Exactly right.
So you've got a very interesting background, and I can understand why you would land at the chamber, and why you're so good at what you do.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Gene, what about the chamber itself? What exactly is the mission of the chamber?
That's a great question. And in reality, the mission of the chamber really comes down to one word, which is advocacy. We are advocates for the business community in Pennsylvania, for improving the business climate in Pennsylvania to grow jobs. Your lead-in was exactly right. Government really doesn't create jobs. Government hires as it needs to, but it doesn't create private sector jobs, doesn't do job creation. It, as you pointed out, creates a climate that allows for job creation and economic growth. And as we know, this governor knows, Representative House Majority Leader Turzai knows, that comes about by a climate that is open and receptive to private sector investment. And that's what we're doing here. And that's what we advocate for on a daily basis.
And one of the misunderstandings, let's call it, I was in business for 10 years. My wife and I ran a little grocery store, a little meat market in Tamaqua. And I always tell people the happiest day of my life was the day that I bought that store, and the second happiest was the day that I sold it.
I understand.
But I will tell you, Gene, as when you talk about experience, practical experience that you bring to the table as a legislator, I will tell you that experience was by far the most the most important experience that I brought to the table as a legislator. And I mentioned to you, I was a small business guy, and one of the things that they talk about is they make it sound like you represent these big industries and these large companies. And talk a little bit about who you do represent.
Well, that's a great question, and as you know, and of course based on your own background, you know that most businesses are small businesses. Now you can go through an hour explaining and going through the different definitions of what a small business is. A Small Business Administration in Washington will say, depending on the type of business, sometimes it's 500 and under, sometimes it's 250 and under. I think most people, when you ask them what a small business is, they kind of will say it's 10 or 20 or 30. For insurance purposes, and our organization is involved in providing health insurance options in the marketplace, it's, from our perspective, like 50 and under. As I mentioned, the overwhelming majority of businesses in this country are small business. So are our members. Our members are small businesses. Yes, we have all kinds of businesses, from the ones every name in Pennsylvania you can think of, all across Pennsylvania, down to literally stores like you had on the corner that sell groceries, or the drugstore, or all kinds of operations, small manufacturers. everything across the board, because we are the largest broad-based business advocacy group. That means small, large, geographically diverse, as well as the type of product and service they provide. So we have all of those. So our issues are ones that are important to both large businesses, mid-sized businesses, as well as small.
I guess as we get into some of the issues and some of the topics, I guess the hot button issue that we're hearing about, I see there were some hearings going on today, and that is privatization of the LCB. I have made my position known loud and clear.
Yes.
I say to people that in my lifetime, there are very few things that I've seen that government can do better than the private sector. I was certainly fully supportive and will continue to be fully supportive of total privatization of the LCB. Just your thoughts on that issue.
Absolutely, and I think you hit on it. I think there are things that we can all agree are the role of federal and state and even local government. In our view, the sale of alcoholic beverages is not a role that state government ought to play. 48 other states have largely figured out a system that provides more consumer choice and convenience than Pennsylvania does. Some of them retain control over hard liquor, let's say, but virtually every other state, with the exception of Utah, gives their citizens more choice and convenience. We believe our members can provide that choice and convenience through various other outlets while maintaining the kind of control that we need to make sure that alcohol doesn't get into the wrong hands. We believe that grocery stores, convenience stores, large retail outlets, all of these, and I don't want to leave anybody out, but all of these can provide the type of product and the service that's necessary that will allow the LCB to focus on what they really ought to be focusing on, which is enforcement. Our members sell lots of products that you could argue have problems associated with them. Pharmaceuticals, we sell gasolines, chemicals. We sell all these with the appropriate protections. And we have our members who are selling them now. If you look at certain grocery stores, they're selling beer, and they like the opportunity to make a more convenient choice for their customers and Pennsylvania citizens. It can be done. 48 other states have figured out how to do it. We need to do it here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and the other thing, I honestly believe that, the educational aspect, we need to continue to drive that.
Absolutely.
Okay? The enforcement, we need to continue to drive that. And I think that's where we belong as government. We believe in educating people in terms of, of the dangers of alcohol and not to abuse alcohol, and also in terms of enforcing those laws. Some people will say to you, well, if the private sector gets into the business, they're going to sell to anybody. That's not true. I believe that we're talking about responsible business people who are going to be making a substantial investment in those licenses, in whatever work they have to do to prepare for that. And I tell people all the time, I know that if I were still in business and I was doing that, I would be certain to protect that investment and to be certain that, that it was done the way it should be done.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Look, I do believe that the folks at LCB do a good job of making sure that happens now. But I do not believe, as I've already said, we have our members that sell, for example, prescription drugs, which bring their own issues as well. Yet there's tight control. They're well regulated, and the people who, as you point out, invest in those have a vested interest in making sure that that operation works well. Someone who's invested hundreds of thousands of dollars or even a couple of millions of dollars in some type of outlet is going to be very hesitant to have that investment lost to them because they don't take the necessary steps. I was at a place, one of the supermarkets that now sells beer. They check everybody. Jerry, I'm well over 21 years old. They check every single person that comes in that store. And if that's the way it ought to be, that's the way it ought to be. They use scanners on licenses. Our members can do this, can sell this product, and again, we can, as you and I have agreed, we can let the LCB fall into the role that they ought to, which is enforcing Pennsylvania's rules governing alcohol.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to, I know that I'm constantly lobbying my senator, as I know all members are, and I look forward to seeing how that progresses. Hopefully we can get that on the governor's desk, and we can get out of that business. It's a philosophical thing with me too, Gene. I mean, when you talk about core and essential services of government, when you talk about corrections, when you talk about education, yes, transportation, the human services. They're areas that we belong in. That's what we should be
Absolutely.
doing. We shouldn't be selling booze because
Absolutely.
I just don't think. The other, I guess I wonder, Gene, whenever I go out and talk to groups, particularly business groups, I hear two things. I hear, when you reach out and you say, what can we do to help you? Where are the problems? And the same two issues always come to light: taxes
Yes.
and regulations.
Yes.
Can we talk a little bit about both of those?
We can talk a lot about both of those, Representative, because there's a lot to be said for that. I completely agree. Our tax structure here in Pennsylvania, and of course, we need to separate it out a little bit. Small businesses pay the pass-through rate of 3.07. And fortunately, thanks to the work of elected officials like you and those of you in your House and in the Senate, we're finally getting rid of something called the capital stock and franchise tax, which is a tax on assets, whether you make money or not. We're one of, I think, only 2 states that still has assessed that. It began to be phased out, I think, 13, 14 years ago. It was delayed a couple times, increased. We're finally going to be done with that by the end of this term. It needs to be done. On the corporate side, we're talking about large corporations, and we've said that our mix in terms of our membership includes all of those. We have what I believe is the highest effective corporate net income tax rate in the United States at 9.99.
Yeah.
Now, Iowa has a slightly higher rate, but theirs is graduated. Ours is from $1. When you combine Pennsylvania's rate with the United States rate, which is the highest in the world, you could argue we have the worst, the most uncompetitive corporate tax structure in the world. We need to change that. The governor's acknowledged that he wants to change that. Your House Majority Leader, I believe the Senate has fallen into that as well. They know that we need to reduce those rates. We are not competitive with that. Our view is when you make a more competitive tax structure, you actually lead to higher revenues because you will have more investment come in. Our Commonwealth is taken off the table when you look at certain business expansions and investments. I worked, as I mentioned, for BP. Part of what I did for them was involved in business development section for a while. We would go around and look at what tax rates, among other things, not the only thing, but one of the things. Many times Pennsylvania is taken off the table for discussion when people see that 9.99. And it's a shame because we have tremendous assets that we have here, our location, our huge natural gas resources that we have that we're fully developing, the other natural resources like water that we have, the workforce that we have. So it's a shame that our tax structure takes us out of the competition for these good paying jobs that we should be in the mix for.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. I guess, so basically, and House Bill 440, that's Chairman Reed's bill.
Yes.
And I believe that addresses
And we support that.
Yeah, and there's been some recent activity on that legislation.
There has been.
And it looks like it is moving along. What about the elimination? It's the elimination of the cap on net operating loss. Did you talk about that at all?
We didn't, but that is another piece. We in New Hampshire are 2 states in the U.S. that have the worst tax treatment for operating losses. Now, where that comes in as part of a critical nature is for certain startup companies and cyclical companies. The way that you treat losses, without getting into a lot of details, has a huge impact on many companies. And again, we have the worst tax treatment along with New Hampshire for that. We've made some improvements in the last few years. We're looking to do more, but again, that is part of it. We made some strides. I think it's important to point out we've moved to, in terms of how you calculate your tax burden, we've moved to 100% sales. For years, believe it or not, we actually penalized companies for setting up operations in Pennsylvania with bricks and mortar and hiring our citizens. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, you and the other members of the legislature changed that. So we now have lost that, and that makes us more competitive. So we need to start working more on the NOL side, working more on the net operating or on the CNI side. You also asked about regulations. I could not agree more. When you talk to businesses across the board, whether they're environmental regulations or regulations governing shipment of goods, any number of things, labor regulations, they're strangling businesses in this country and in this Commonwealth. I know we have a governor, we have your colleagues in the House who want to work with us to do that. We appreciate your efforts, and we need absolutely to take that on. And
I really want to talk more about the regulations when we come back. And before we go on a break, I just want to finish up on the taxes thing. So what you're saying is that we need to eliminate the cap on net operating loss.
Yes.
We need to continue over the next 6 years, we'll be reducing the corporate net income tax from 9.99 to 6.99. And we need to phase out the capital stock and franchise tax. And I think you said that by 2014 that would be done.
I believe
and
it's
I guess
2014.
The last thing, and if I missed it, forgive me, the Delaware loophole.
Okay.
What can you just explain to people real briefly what exactly, and if I missed it,
No,
I'm
that's
sorry.
fine. The creation of what's called a passive investment company, or sometimes referred to as a Delaware holding, has for years been a legal way of reducing a corporation's tax burden. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Department of Revenue, as virtually every other state, has a means of going after a company if they believe they are improperly using one of these passive investments. The reality is that companies have gotten away from them for various reasons at the federal level and as also related to the state level. Some people over the last 5 to 10 years wanted to go after this Delaware holding issue by implementing something called combined reporting. Right now, Pennsylvania is what's called a separate company reporting state. You report on your Pennsylvania operations and you pay tax on them. If you're a business owner and you have operations in 4 states, you would have all 4 states aggregated. It would be determined what your Pennsylvania obligation was. To be quite honest, sometimes your operations in other states do better and your Pennsylvania one doesn't, yet you wind up paying higher taxes on it. This combined reporting, lumping all the states in together, all of the state operations together, would have resulted in companies that didn't even have a Delaware holding company paying higher corporate taxes. It would have been very ill-advised. We thank the members of your caucus, we thank the members of the Senate Republican caucus and the governor over the last couple of years of making sure that this very punitive tax strategy does not take over and make Pennsylvania less competitive.
Thanks, Gene. And when we come back, we're going to talk about regulations, maybe a little bit about transportation, some labor issues, maybe education. We
Sure.
have a lot to cover. But let's take a break right now. Legislative report will return in a moment.
Did you know that Violet Oakley was the first female artist to receive a large commission for artwork done in a United States Capitol building? In 1902, Joseph Houston, designer and architect for the 3rd Harrisburg Capitol building, commissioned Violet Oakley to paint murals for the governor's reception room. He believed that Oakley's contribution would add interest to the building and act as an encouragement of women of the state. Prior to beginning her work for the Capitol, Oakley set out to England to conduct research for her murals. Upon return, she decided to center her artwork on William Penn and the founding of Pennsylvania. Oakley made sure that Penn's ideals of justice and peace could be seen throughout her work. In 1906, she completed 13 murals titled The Founding of the State of Liberty Spiritual and was placed in sequential order around the governor's reception room. These murals were some of the first to be installed in the Capitol. When Edwin Austin Abbey, another artist for the Capitol, died in 1911, Oakley was offered another opportunity to create murals for the unfinished Senate and Supreme Court chambers. Her work on the Senate murals, including International Understanding, was completed by 1919. Oakley then completed the Supreme Court murals, including the Divine Law, by 1927. Oakley is said to be the principal artist for the Capitol, with a total of 43 murals on display. She remains one of the greatest muralists in the United States. Now you know.
Welcome back to the program. I'm State Representative Jerry Knowles. Today's topic is the economic climate here in Pennsylvania. My guest is Gene Barr from the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. Again, Gene, thank you for joining us today.
Great to be here.
Yeah, in the first half of the show, we talked a little bit about your background, about the chamber and what they do, and about taxes. And I'd just like to move on and maybe talk about regulation.
Sure.
And if you can share with me, I mean, I hear from various business people about regulations, and explain to me exactly what the problem is.
Well, there's so many issues because a lot of them don't even come about through legislative action. Some are as a result of legislative action, but oftentimes the regulating agency can make them tougher than was intended in the legislative side. Let me give you a perfect example of how it's impacted Pennsylvania. You remember a year ago, 18 months ago, we had 3 refineries, including one of the ones I worked at in the Philadelphia area, announced they were closing. The reality is those refineries are subject to more regulation because of where they're situated than their competitors on the Gulf Coast. So they were at a competitive disadvantage because of regulation. Fortunately, the governor, the legislators in that area, like Senator Pileggi and some of the other House members that were down there, got involved and got those to where we now have at least 2 of the 3 operations viable. But those were directly related in many cases, and the companies that were ready to close them said this: environmental regulation. We all want clean air, clean water, clean land. The reality is sometimes we go too far. And sometimes, as you point out, there are better ways of getting at things rather than these blanket strict regulations.
Gene, I'll tell you that as a staffer, when I worked for then Representative Dave Argel, I can remember when the Ridge administration came in, and I can remember having a meeting with the administration. And the philosophy was, we are here to enforce regulations, but we are not here to be an obstacle to someone who wants to locate or who wants to expand. Now, do we want to circumvent these regulations? Absolutely not. We want to comply with them. But I want you to work with business, and I want you to come up with a way that we can comply with the regulations.
Correct.
And that we can get them. It can't be it can't be a gotcha.
That's
and
right.
throwing
It can't be a
obstacles in
gotcha.
front of people.
And we need to expedite our permitting. So many other states have figured out how to get permitting quicker than we do. I will tell you that so many of our companies who want to expand or locate here almost kind of throw their hands up in the air because of the length of permitting. And to be blunt, the number of municipalities that we have adds to that overlay of permitting.
And in my eyes, and as I said, that was the that was the information that we got from Governor Ridge, was that we need to be more business friendly. And I got to tell you, and you know, this is just me speaking. During this past administration, it seemed to me like we were slipping back into that obstructionist attitude. And now I'm hoping, and I don't think we're already there, because I think in 8 years it got to be tough again. It got to be tough on business. But I think under Governor Corbett, I think that we're getting back to that area, recognizing that we need to enforce regulations,
Yes.
we need to enforce laws, but we need to make it so that people want to locate.
I would agree with you, and I think when we look at our natural gas resource, we have among the most strict regulations and requirements in the world. Mm-hmm. The companies are operating at extremely high levels, but they're operating because it's been a cooperative effort.
Very good. A couple of other things, I'd be curious to hear. Prevailing wage, right to work. I know that I'm a part of a package of bills, as House Bill 50, 51, 2, 3, and 4. I'm the prime sponsor of 54. Could you talk a little bit about, I mean, right to work kind of drives me crazy, because I've been accused of some people of trying to bust the unions. And nobody's trying to bust the unions. All that we're trying to do is we're trying to give you a choice. Give you a choice. And if that union cannot convince you
Right.
that there's a benefit to you joining that union, why should you, I don't get it, Gene.
Well, let's address right to work real quick, Representative, because I think you've hit on it. I firmly believe that everyone should have the right to join a union. They should also have the right not to join a union, which unfortunately is not the case here in Pennsylvania. That's all that this issue is about. You and I have talked about this before. The analogy is, if every company coming into Pennsylvania was required to join the Pennsylvania Chamber, that would help me. I wouldn't need membership people anymore. The requirement is, and it really means, I need to go out and sell the value of my membership. The union folks need to do the same, rather than relying on the state to mandate it. And in reality, the taxpayers are functioning as the dues collector for the government-run unions as well. That shouldn't happen. They should collect their dues on their own as well, and that needs to change.
I don't think people realize that, Gene. I don't think people realize what's going on there, and I think we're going to correct that.
Good.
Prevailing wage. There were some bills that just moved out of Representative Chairman Scabella's committee.
We have a prevailing wage requirement that shouldn't be in there at all. It costs taxpayers money. It hasn't been changed since 1962 or 1963. These are very, very modest proposals. We need to raise that threshold number. We need to index it to inflation. The reality is that it costs taxpayers money. If your folks out there talk to their members of their school board, members of their borough council, their township supervisors and commissioners, they will tell them what the state's prevailing wage law costs them in terms of their property taxes. And I think if they made those asks of their local elected officials, they would be shocked at what this brings and the hit on their pocketbook.
Gene, I got to tell you, we only got about 4 minutes left, but I was at a policy committee hearing in Carbon County, and one testifier got up and talked about the unemployment rate in Carbon County, if not the highest, one of the highest at the time in the Commonwealth. Shortly thereafter, we have another testifier who stands up and says that they have a large industry in Carbon County. They have a half a dozen positions, skilled positions,
Yes.
and they can't fill them.
Yes.
What's the problem there?
Representative, in addition to the concerns about healthcare costs, in addition to the concerns about regulations, one of the most common complaints that I hear from my members as I travel the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is that they tell me they cannot find the people they need to fill the jobs that they have. You are exactly right. Whether it's welders or truck drivers or electricians particularly, we do not have those skilled trades that we need in order to fill the jobs we have. And I think you and I would agree that we're kind of the generation that said you have to go to 4-year school. We've done a huge disservice to many of our students by telling them that the only way they're going to be successful is going to a 4-year school. Clearly you need a 4-year school, or sometimes beyond if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or many of these others. But in many cases, that 1 or 2 years in a trade is going to give you a family-sustaining job for your life. One of the interesting things, I served on Governor Corbett's Marcellus Shale Commission. One of the interesting things we heard during the terms of that commission was the highest average starting salaries in the entire Penn State system are coming out of Penn College in Williamsport. Much of that is related to the Marcellus Shale development, but these are trades jobs, jobs that are paying $70,000, $80,000 a year when these students get out, and we need to get reoriented back to where we better align what the workforce needs are with what's coming out of our post-secondary institutions. We need to do a much better job of that, and I'll be honest, some of that's on business. We need to start forecasting where all these openings are going to be, start transmitting that back such that if a student still wants to take a 4-year program someplace, they ought to at least know what the chances of success here in Pennsylvania or elsewhere might be. They may be better off with a 1 or 2 year some type of program that they have the aptitude for.
Thaddeus Stevens in Lancaster, which is where I went to school, graduated from, they graduate, like 99% of the young people that they graduate go into good jobs. I think that we need to get the message out there. And I think we're, with the community colleges and with some of the stuff that's going on, I think that we are getting the message out there. And I think that young people are hopefully beginning to realize there's nothing wrong with being a plumber. There's nothing wrong with being a welder. There's nothing wrong with being an electrician.
Absolutely not.
And that's the message. And I think that when we not that there's any, listen, there are some people who want to get and need a 4-year degree for what they want to do. And God bless them, let them go get it. But the point of the matter, as you had noted and as we had noted earlier, is that everyone doesn't have to get a 4-year degree. You can get a 2-year degree. You can get training at a community college,
yes,
where you can go into a good job and make $40,000, $50,000 a year.
Think about how one occupation in particular has changed in the 30, 40, 50 years since you and I started driving, which is when you go back and look at auto mechanics, a job that's changed from kind of lifting, doing a lot of heavy lifting, and to where now they have to be absolutely expert in computer technology. Everything is diagnostic. It's one of those jobs that, again, you can have a family-sustaining career based on that. And again, you have to be very advanced in terms of what you know for that. All these jobs are changing, and we need those technical skills to move our society forward.
Gene, I'll tell you, there were so many other things I wanted to cover, but that's really all the time that we have for today's program. If you need any assistance with any state government matter, please contact me at one of my local offices or through my website. That information will be on the screen in a moment. I want to thank you for watching, and please join me on my next edition of Legislative Report. Gene, again, thank you very much for joining me.
Glad to be here.
Okay.
Glad to be here.